So remember from the last lecture, I told you that there are many common newbie mistakes that I see when students are first learning GIS. And so I want to spend time early on, right away, talking about those mistakes so that you can avoid them. And a big one has to do with file management. I've already mentioned several times, files are weird when you're working with ArcGIS. And you need to think about how it works with those files, how those files are stored on your computer, and you need to have a strategy so that you can work with the software and not lose data and not screw it up. Specifically, you need a good strategy so that you can move from one computer to the next without any issues. And that's where I see a lot of students having issues, is when they move from their home computer to a university computer or vice versa, or they move between computers on campus, something like that. And when they go to the new computer, all of a sudden things don't work. Most of the time, it's because you didn't move the files correctly. So let's talk about that. Remember that when we look in ArcCatalog, we can see a single file. In this example here, it's a shapefile. And it's one file in ArcCatalog. And ArcCatalog's whole purpose is to help you move files from one place to another. And the reason you have ArcCatalog is because if you look in Windows, that one GIS file is actually several different files. And so ArcCatalog makes it easy for you. If you move the one GIS file, ArcCatalog is smart enough to go, oh, there's 7 files in different places and let me move those as well. That's why ArcCatalog exists. But this is also why it's not easy to move things from computer to computer. But I'm going to show you a strategy that has worked for me for, oh geez, how long have I been doing this now? 20 years? Oh, am I that old? Oh, well, anyway, it works. All right.
Now, one thing that you need to be aware of is that ArcCatalog does not have a recycle bin. So if you delete something in ArcCatalog, it's gone. It doesn't magically show up in your Windows recycling bin or anything like that. So that's something else that you need to be aware of and be careful with.
So here is the key to the whole strategy, right? Is folders. Make a folder in Windows for every unique project that you work on, right? So in this class, you'll have a folder for homework 1 and homework 2 and homework 3 and a folder for your final project. Whatever. Every time you've got a new project, just make a folder for it somewhere, okay? And then every single thing you use for your project, put it in that folder. And say you've got a shapefile that's over here in one folder and you want to use it again, make a copy of it, put it in your new folder. Save everything you create to that folder. All right? And then when you're done, just grab that folder and move it to your USB drive or send it to the cloud or whatever. So if you put everything in that folder and then you just move the folder, then it's very difficult to make a mistake, because all those different files that ArcGIS needs, they're all tucked into that folder. And so you've got what you need. And if you use ArcCatalog to move these files and copy files into that folder, ArcCatalog will go and grab every file you need and put it in your new folder. That's it. That's my whole strategy, but it works. So here's just a diagram, a visual example of this. Here's my new project. First homework. I'm going to call it homework 1. New empty folder. I'm using ArcCatalog to copy everything into this folder that I need. Every shapefile, every raster, every vector, whatever, all goes into this file. I'm using ArcCatalog, so ArcCatalog brings in everything that I need it to. When I get done, in this example, I have 3 shape files I put in the folder. But if I go into Windows and open up this folder, there's probably 20, 25 actual different files in there. When I'm done, I copy this to my USB drive. So now I have a backup because I have it on my hard drive and I have it on my USB drive. And now I can take my USB drive and I can plug it into a different computer and everything I need will be there. And when I'm done on that new computer, then I just take the whole folder and move it back to the USB drive. Okay? Or I can use it to the cloud or wherever is easiest. Now, this is a backup. Don't make this your only backup. You know, again, just use your Google Drive, use Dropbox, have a second copy of this folder somewhere, set up some file system that automatically syncs, and then you don't have to worry about it. Now, one of the issues that's going to come up is that you need to work with relative path names, not absolute path names. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that ArcMap by default looks for absolute file names, and so when it's looking for a file, it's looking for the actual name of the original file, you know, with the C:/something/something/something. And when you go to a new computer, that file name is likely to change, and so ArcMap's going to be confused. But if you put everything in one folder and you set ArcMap to look for relative path names, not absolute, relative, then it knows to look inside that folder no matter what computer it's on. I'll show you what I'm talking about. This is how we're going to set to look for relative path names, and I have an actual click-by-click demo of this coming up later. But basically you go to File, Map Document Properties. At the bottom there's a checkbox for Store Relative Path Names to Data Sources. When you install ArcMap, this is not checked by default. So if it's not checked, or if somebody gives you a project, you want to check this box. You really want this box checked all the time. And every time you make a new map project, you want that box to be checked. But you don't want to have to remember that every time. So we're going to set that as the default for all your new projects. And so we're going to do that if we go to Customize, and then we go to ArcMap Options, and on the General tab, right in the middle, there's this option here that should be checked. In this example, it's not checked, but you want this box checked. Make relative path names the default for new map documents. You do this one time, you never have to do it again on that computer. But every time you go to a new computer, you're going to have to do this one time so you don't screw anything up. So keep that in mind. Again, a little bit later, I'll have a click-by-click example of this. This makes your life a million times easier. Here's why. If I didn't do that, if I left the default as it is when you install ArcMap, then let's say I create a new folder like I'm supposed to. I call it Homework 1. I create it and I just put it on my desktop. Easy to find, right? And so if I look at the actual name of that folder, if I go into Windows Explorer, Windows File Explorer, and I look at the actual name of that folder, it's not just Homework 1, it's everything. You know, it tells the computer where that file is stored, right? It's C:documents and settings /TSS105/desktop/HW1. So all that stuff in front of the HW1 is necessary. That's the absolute file name, right? And so then I'm going to go, let's say I'm going to take this home and work on it. So I copy the folder to my USB drive, just like I'm supposed to, plug my USB drive in at home, copy it over to my desktop at home, right? It's on the desktop again. It should be fine. It's not fine. Because when I go home and put it on my laptop, the folder, laptop, my desktop, doesn't matter. Anyway, when I go home and I look at the file name on my home computer, it's slightly different. That part in front of the HW1 is slightly different because I'm on a different computer. And you've seen this before. You know, you work on different computers, you have a slightly different name depending upon whether it's a work computer or home computer, and whether you're an administrator, and all those different things. Big picture. When I go to a different computer, even though I named that folder one thing and I copy that folder over, it actually can have a different absolute name on different computers. That's why we don't like to use absolute names when we work with GIS. I'm sure there are situations where absolute file names are important, but not for what you're doing. For most people, you're jumping from computer to computer, you want relative file names. Okay, if I did this and I opened up the project on my computer at home, I would get the little red exclamation point, and you will see these, right? And so if you're working and you bring up a project and nothing shows up, you're like, what are you talking about? I was working on this earlier today and now there's nothing here, and you panic. And you look, and if you look over in the table of contents, you can see here there's a little red exclamation point next to the name. That means that ArcMap cannot find that file. It knows it needs to look for that file, but it doesn't know where that file is. And most likely, it's because you're using absolute path names. And so it's looking for the actual exact file name from the original creation of it. But because that was on a different computer, that absolute name is slightly different. Whereas if I have it set to relative path names, it knows to just look in this folder. It doesn't care where that folder is. So again, why am I beating this to death? Because I see this all the time with people who are first starting out with GIS. And so I'm trying to help you avoid these problems. And so again, if I set it to relative path names, no matter where I'm at, it will always look for stuff within the HW1 folder. And that's the reason why we just put everything in that one folder, set to relative path names. I can go anywhere and it'll work. Okay, a couple other little things you need to know about working with files. I said that ArcMap can be a little touchy about files. What we just discussed was kind of the big thing. But sometimes it's a little touchy about spaces in the file name. And that's something that you don't expect, and it's usually not a problem, but every once in a while this becomes a problem. So for example, if I'm making a new folder and I'm calling it homework 1, you know, I'll call it homework _1. Don't put a space in that file name. It's just a good habit to get into. Like I said, most of the time you'll be fine, but every once in a while, if you have a space in the file name, that causes ArcMap to hiccup. Remember that if you store a folder in, say, My Documents, excuse me, and you name it correctly, you know, you don't put any spaces in that folder name, but you store it in My Documents, well, the full name is actually My Space Documents. There's actually a space in the name. Now again, if you're working with relative path names, this might be fine, but this is just something for you to be aware of. Same deal if you put on the desktop, right? You think, well, put on the desktop, there's no space in the word desktop. Well, yeah, there is. Because technically, in Windows, it's like Documents, space, and space settings / desktop. Chances are the absolute file name has a space in it. Again, if you're using relative file names, it might not be a big deal. Just get in the habit of not putting spaces in file names, if you can get away with it. 95% of the time, you have a space in the file name, it's no big deal, okay? But if something is not working and you think you're doing everything correctly, sometimes just changing the file to exclude those spaces will solve it. That's one of the little hiccups of ArcMap that will drive people crazy. Does not happen that much, doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to, I'll tell you that. So it's just something to keep in the back of your brain, that spaces sometimes are not your friend. Most of the time this occurs when you're working with rasters, not vectors. Usually vectors, you can have a space in the name, no biggie. But it's rasters that give you a headache if you've got a space in the name. So keep that in mind too. Okay. Now I said, you know, you make this folder, you want to move it to a USB drive so you can go to a different computer. Keep in mind that there can be some issues with that again, right? Is that the drive letter might change when you go to a new computer. So you plug it in at a university computer, and based upon how many hard drives are in that computer, it calls your USB K, just because that's the next letter that's open. But when you come home, you plug it into your own computer, maybe your computer calls it F drive, just because that's the first letter that's open, right? The drive letter can change for those USB things. So that can be a problem, right? That can confuse ArcGIS. Again, if you use relative path names, it is less likely to be a problem. Another problem with USB drives is that they can be slow. We're working with big files here, and the file transfer rate is not, although it's fast, it's sometimes not as fast as ArcGIS wants it to be. So again, your best bet is to work on the hard drive and just use your USB drive for backups and to move from one to another. But if I take my USB and I go to a different computer, then copy the folder onto that hard drive. Do all your work, then copy the new folder, you know, erase, you know, the folder from the USB, do all your work on the hard drive, then copy the folder back over, or copy it over and overwrite, you know, the new files or whatever. The point is, don't work off the USB drive. Again, a lot of times I see errors when this happens. And if you just move your files to the hard drive, then everything runs fine. I'm just telling you, I've seen this before. Okay, again, to reiterate, our ultimate file strategy. New folder every time you have a new project. Every single file you need for that project gets copied into that folder. When changing computers, you copy the entire folder. When you go to a new computer, take that folder, put it on the hard drive, work off the hard drive. It runs much smoother and faster. I mentioned that file names can be a problem. Right now, don't worry about it. Just don't sweat it. Keep that in the back of your brain though. If you're doing something, especially with rasters, and it just won't work, maybe take out the spaces from the file names. See if that makes a difference. Of course, for all this to work, you need to set to relative path names. Last thing I want to talk about as far as saving files is that when you're working on a project, just like when you're working in Word or Excel or PowerPoint, you want to save often, right? You never know when the power is going to go out or your hard drive is going to crash. So you want to save all the time. But when you save in ArcMap, that file that gets saved, that's just a project file. That just sort of saves information about, you know, how much you've zoomed in, what files you're working with, what colors you're using. It's all the stuff, all the work you've done in ArcMap gets saved. But that file does not save all the GIS data. The GIS files are separate, okay? And so when people are first starting out and never worked with GIS before, a lot of times when they move to a new computer, they'll just grab that one file. That file has an extension MXD. That's an ArcGIS file. And a student will just grab that MXD file and go to a new computer and double click on it, and nothing will work. Nothing will be there. And they'll be like, well, where is everything? Well, all that MXD does is save kind of all your formatting and things you've done in ArcMap. It does not save the actual data files. Those are different files, and it just points to those files. That's another reason why we just put everything in one folder and take the whole folder. That ensures you've got everything you need. Okay. Now, when you get stuck on something, as with any problem with any computer, for any class and any program, the first thing you should do is just Google it. Google your exact issue. And that should be a duh right now, right? It's like the almost automatic thing. Take the exact error message, the exact thing, put it into Google. Chances are you're going to get a hit that somebody's had the same problem, and it's something simple. Esri, the company that makes ArcMap, has forums that are also very good. People are very helpful on there. Their new interface is, to me, more confusing. Maybe I'm just an old fart. The forums used to be a lot easier to find stuff, and now there's so much there, it's very difficult to find things, but still. The people on the Esri forums are very helpful, very friendly. Usually you can post something, say, hey, I'm a newbie. What is going on here? Of course, emailing me, calling me is always a good option too. As always, probably should be your second option. Google should be your first, I should be your second, Esri should be your third. If I ain't here though, you need some of these other options. Okay, stick around. I'm going to show you click by click how to do some of these things I talked about in here. That's coming up next. And then as soon as that's done, we're done here. Let me know if you got any questions. But stick around, something's coming up next.
Okay, again, I want to demonstrate some of the concepts that I recently discussed with you. Here we're looking at Windows, File Explorer, regular old Windows Explorer, and you see that I have a folder here which I'm calling Lecture 2, which is, I don't know, this is Lecture 4 or something, doesn't matter. When I open that folder, here is a GIS project and all the data files. And here you have an MXD file. That is the map file for ArcGIS. But you see there's a whole bunch of other files. And these are all different shape files that are in this project. And so you see within there are lots of other files. These might not be shape files. These might be a different kind of file. Doesn't matter. The point is there's lots and lots of files in this complicated file structure, and it's very difficult to keep track of all them unless you just put everything, and I mean everything you need, into this folder. And we use ArcCatalog to copy those files into this folder, and then we can just copy this entire folder. So when I'm done, I'll take this entire folder and copy it to a USB drive, or copy it to my Google Drive, or whatever. When I do that, I can't screw this up. Now, if I double click this, it should launch ArcMap, and then we can work with these files. Okay, and so you can see that I've got a project here. Again, these are all separate GIS data files that I have included in this project, and they're all contained within this folder. And so if I just copied this MXD file, but not the rest of this, it will not work if I go to a different computer. You need all of this to make it work. This MXD only saves information from ArcMap. It does not save information from the data files that you have added to this project. Okay. So once you do that, and you copy your folder from computer to computer, you need to do a couple other things to make sure that this is going to work. If I go to File, and then Map Document Properties, and then if I look down here at the very bottom, it says Store Relative Path Names to Data Sources. That should always be checked. And so it's already checked, which is good, but if yours is not checked, it should be checked. Now, I can move that folder to any computer that has ArcMap on it, and it will know to look for all the files within that folder. That's another reason to put all your files into one folder. If you don't, and you go to a different computer, it's not going to know where to look. And if you don't have this box checked and you go to a different computer, chances are the folder name's going to change and ArcMap's not going to know where to look. And so by doing this, you save yourself a lot of headaches. Now, you don't want to do that every single time you make a new project. You want that to be the default. So to make it the default, we're going to go to Customize, then to ArcMap Options, then to General, and then here in the middle it says Make Relative Paths the Default for New Map Documents. Make sure that is checked. It does not come checked when you install it. Check it once, hit OK, and that's it. You'll never have to mess with that again on this computer. But now if you go to a new computer, you're going to have to do those steps again one time to make sure it knows to look for relative path names, not absolute path names. By doing this, and by putting all your files into one folder, and by moving the folders from computer to computer, you should have no troubles.